morning, everyone. Wasn't Ann Compton spectacular? Oh, my God. That was so interesting and so real and so authentic, and I think a great example of the leadership attributes that we talk about. And great question, Carlton, as you got her talking really about what are the values and the authentic qualities of a leader that I think we all aspire to be. So she was terrific, terrific speaker. Thank you for that, Hattie. The speakers on our next panel are also terrific individuals, each with their own story and their own kind of leading edge qualities. And I'm thrilled to welcome to the stage, if you would join me, please, Michelle Mason, Steve Carley, and Barrie Schwartz. So I know each of these three people individually. I've never put them together before, so this is going to be fun. Each of them have very different roles and responsibilities. But each of them are known in their own spheres and certainly their own, in their own arenas as authentic, tremendously successful leaders. And so we're going to take the opportunity this morning to learn from each of them kind of what has helped their path of success, the things that they deeply believe in, the values that they hold dear, the lessons that they've learned along the way, and also asking them to talk a little bit as we go about their views on obviously advancing women leaders, the importance of strong women leaders in today's business environment. So I'm going to ask each of them, just as an opening round, to talk a little bit about the scope and the scale and the kind of richness of the work that they're doing today, the organizations that each of them lead, and just to kind of set the context for the Barrie, tell us, Barrie's one of our global shapers, as designated by the World Economic Forum. Barrie is also on the Millennial Advisory Board here at the Women's Foodservice Forum. Very wonderful woman with lots of exciting things going on, a portfolio career, I guess we call it. In my vernacular, you have a better term for it, I'm sure, doing all kinds of very interesting things. Tell us a little bit about the scope of what you're involved in.
Yeah, my name is Barrie Schwartz, and I'm out of New Orleans, Louisiana, and I'm 25. And I started the year I graduated from college a company called My House NOLA, which is a creative culinary production company that specializes in food truck festivals. So we organize a lot of different individual culinary entrepreneurs and put together bigger forums where they can come and invite the general public. And we act as a big middleman between brokering catering deals, working with government officials and nonprofits to put on really fabulous, diverse culinary experiences. And as of February, I am also the manager of the St. Roch Market, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard. It's a very hip new trend food halls. It's a 13,000 square foot building that has 13 individual small restaurants inside it. And it's a really unique business model, and it's been a really interesting transition and really cool, focusing on both having my own company and being a part of a new company. And yeah, it's really exciting.
We saw, Barrie was showing the three of us photographs this morning of the St. Roch Market, and it is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. 13 vendor partners that come in and sign a 6-month lease each.
Yeah.
They come in, they get a chance to kind of advance their concept, get traction, get eyeballs, and people trying their concepts, and then ideally they rotate out, and you go into a different venue after that, on a rotation, others come in.
Yep.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with a question for you, Barrie, because you're unique in this regard, and then I'm going to ask Steve and Michelle to comment it from their own perspective. So your life is very kind of, it's got a lot of, it's like a mosaic of lots of different pieces, right? You don't have what we call a traditional, kind of career where you go and you work every day to one place. You have multiple things going on. In part, you own your own business. In part, you're working for someone else as part of the manager of the St. Roch Market. Can you just kind of describe the choices that you've made and why you've chosen kind of that kind of mosaic of a life at this stage of your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I moved to New Orleans, I was right out of college, and I was very confident. I went to University of Michigan. I was involved in everything, and I just assumed I would automatically find a job, and that definitely didn't happen. Yeah, so that definitely didn't happen, and I also was realizing as I kept applying that I wasn't really interested in the job descriptions I was seeing. And so, yeah, I actually just went to Austin and San Francisco and saw a very big need for a permanent food truck lot in the city of New Orleans. And when I started digging into that, I realized that the zoning didn't allow for that. And I started just experimenting the concept by putting on these small food truck festivals that really, my business sort of found me. I mean, Microsoft came to New Orleans for an 8,000 person conference and just saw my really small website and was like, we can't handle, the hotel they were at couldn't handle the catering. They were like, we want you to help us find 7 food trucks. And I told the lady, I remember, I was like, that's gonna be $100 for my coordination. And she was like, and she just whispered to me, she's like, I'm gonna put in $1,000, and that's a really good deal for us. So, I mean, that was me really learning, and I just, yeah, and from there, I mean, the business has really grown, and I've learned a lot, and it's been a really interesting lifestyle, and having this full-time job where all of a sudden, I used to have my customers be the food trucks, and all I cared about was making them happy and want to come to events. And now I'm dealing with the owners of the market, the vendors at the market, the neighborhood who wants to be served, and the customers we are serving, and that's a totally different challenge. So it's been really interesting dealing with that collage.
That's great. So welcome to the leadership role in the restaurant industry, where you have multiple stakeholders with different points of view, right? And it's a great lesson. It's a great comment. Thank you. You are running organizations where you have employees of all kinds of different backgrounds and ages and experiences, and some of them I'm sure are millennials. Let's talk a little bit about your experience in terms of kind of engaging and involving and getting the most out of the millennials who work in your organizations, and kind of what strategies. So imagine, you know, having Barrie as an employee, and her kind of other than now she's asking for $1,000 instead of $100. You know, all the millennials that are coming into your organization to work, and frankly the customer base, Steve, in your case in particular. So talk a little bit about that. Comment on this, Barrie, in terms of what you see in the market, in the food truck community, just and particularly among your own cohort as you see the trends evolving.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big thing is that a lot of my generation and my friends, and increasingly everybody, loves the overused term artisan, and they just want to see that artisan product out there, whether that means goat milk for your coffee. We have that at St. Roch Market and all of these things, and they demand that, but yet when they see the price, they get upset and say we're ripping them off. And that's really hard. I mean, we have our butcher at the market who's constantly telling us that his food costs are 60%, and then he blames us for how much we charge. And we're trying to tell him, we want you to have a quality product, but your food costs have to make sense. And that's a really hard balance, I think, to find. Secondly, I think consumers, the more ADD we get, the busier we are. We really want to have a lot of choices, and I'm sure you know more than I do, especially at a huge restaurant operation. To have a really eclectic menu gets very difficult and complicated. You have leftover product, you don't know how to reuse the same ingredients. And so I think things like food trucks and food halls are really cool for the times, because you can have one vendor focus on one product and bring them all together into the same room so that the customer is getting the choice and the vendor can focus on the product they're good at.
Let's talk a little bit about all three of you just commenting on your perspective from where you are and what you've seen about advancing women leaders. We've talked a lot over the last couple of days about the importance of making certain that we have, in the same way we're working on guest experience on the restaurant, that we're working on employee experience in the business. We have in this room some of the top women in the industry across the country. And what kind of advice would you offer, based again on your experience, on the kinds of practices and principles and innovative things that you've seen work in your own organizations with your colleagues around advancing women? Barrie?
Yeah, it's something I have a really hard time differentiating. If sometimes people treat me differently because I'm a woman or because I'm young. And I feel that I really can't tell which one it is a lot of the time. So that's hard for me. Another thing, I have a friend who is, I mean, she makes the best bread I've ever had in my entire life. Like, if she wanted to, she could be the next, what's the big bread that ever, Wonder Bread.
Wonder Bread.
But like high quality Wonder Bread, I'm serious. And she's working at this restaurant in the quarter, and her bread company is really taking off, and she keeps saying how she just feels so bad. She loves the owners, and she feels so bad leaving them. And I don't know any man who would talk like that. And I just keep telling her, like, they want to support you, and they love you, and this is a way bigger picture thing. Like, you can't feel bad. You have to go and do this. And I feel like I see a lot of women and young people, I'm not sure if it's because they're women or because they're young, but being afraid to speak out. And that's something that I have had a hard time with myself. I mean, I sat down at my review and I told my boss really blatantly, I was like, I'm getting very restless, and if in a year I'm doing this, I can't be here anymore. And he just looked at me like, I thought you were going to say that. And I feel like it ended up being a really good thing, and I watch my coworkers who haven't done that and who just instead complain behind their backs about it, and they're therefore not getting anything done. They end up having a bad attitude because they feel like they're not being heard, but really no one knows they should be listening to them.
There's a lot to think about right there. That's great. You imagine earlier in our career saying, if I'm doing this in a year, if I'm getting restless. Meanwhile, we're doing the same thing for 8, 10 years, trying to get ourselves just like on the ladder, right? And then, but you're gonna move faster than a lot of us did with that attitude too. Good. Barrie?
Well, if anyone wants to be my mentor, you can find me after. I think when I first started, I actually had, I'll give a negative and a positive. I had a very negative mentorship experience. I was actually working on a food truck to gain credibility, and one of the food truck owners came off as very nice, and I was very much searching for help. I had all the right ideas, but it was like a very, very new concept, and the city of New Orleans is very old school with our food and with our politics, so no one really knew what I was talking about. They're like, wait, you don't want to have gumbo and oysters at this event? Or the city had no idea what I was talking about when I asked how to get permits, for example. And this food truck constantly was helping me, and she kept saying, you have to look at the market. None of the food trucks want to pay you to come to these events. You should only charge $15 an event. No one believes that this is going to work. Like, you aren't going to bring a lot of people. And I thought she was really helping me and giving me good insight, and I realized that she was really stopping me from moving forward, and that was a really hard thing to realize. And she ended up writing me a letter after I was successful, and she found out that I didn't choose her for a very big catering opportunity because I knew she wouldn't want to give me a cut. And she ended up writing me, I taught you everything you need to know about social media. Why would you not include me? Which is just funny because I just like on the food truck would ask her to make conversation, like questions about Twitter. She just had turned around the whole situation. But anyways, and then I have had some really, really awesome positive mentors that it's turned out to be the most helpful thing ever. And I think the most important thing someone told me is stop searching for a focus, like focus on what you're doing right now, and your passion will naturally come along. Don't keep searching for it. Put your energy in what you're doing now, and when that comes, you will know. And that has really carried through and is something I think about daily.
In a minute, I'm going to open up and ask those of you in the audience that may have questions or comments or are looking for particular insight from any or all of our speakers to chime in. So before we do, I'm just going to do one quick lightning round of additional questions. You started it, Barrie. I'm going to build on what you started to say. So the question is, and you just answered it, what's the best advice you've ever received? And so I think, would you say it's the focus on what you're doing right now and do it well? Is that a good?
Yeah, and to slow down.
Slow down. Slow down. Slow down.
Yeah, when I was deciding to take this job as manager of the St. Roch market, my main thing I told my bosses is I'm keeping my company, and I think it's going to do nothing but help in this new role. and I have a lot of things I want to bring, and I hope you're fine with me talking about my company at the workplace. And I got advice from a friend who owned a very successful sunglass company, and I asked him if he thought it was a good idea I took the job. And he told me that if I was going to take the job, I had to be in it completely, and I shouldn't focus on anything else, or else I'm not going to learn anything. And at first, I thought that was really good advice, and I was like, maybe I'll stop my company. And weeks later, my friend actually got a job with him, and she wasn't provided health insurance. She was making $28,000 a year, and he was working her to death. And I realized that put his advice more in perspective. And I realized that that wasn't necessarily true, and I could do both things and still learn a lot.
Great.
Question is for Barrie. I am the mother of a 21-year-old daughter who will be graduating from college next spring, and would like to know, from your perspective, how supportive of you were your parents when you were kind of embarking on this journey, and what advice do you have for me as a mother of a 21-year-old who's going to be venturing off and perhaps taking different paths than I took?
So I'm actually from Detroit, and last night, coincidentally, I got a call that my cousin was moving from Chicago to Detroit, and my mom needed to help her, and she's here now. So I still have a very involved mom, and my mom worked at a very traditional advertising company and always encouraged me to get my first salaried job immediately when I graduated college, and was always emailing me ideas for jobs that I wanted nothing to do with. And I would say the more she sent those, the more I wanted to prove that I could start a company and do it in my own way. So I would say really helping your daughter figure out what her talents are and what her interests are, but I don't think pushing will do any good.
So as we close the panel, I'm going to just ask one last question, ask each of you to comment on this. And you may think of it perhaps as a legacy kind of a vision for yourself. You might think of it about a sense of purpose, kind of what it is in the broader sense of the world and the society that you would like to be a part of accomplishing. But as you think about either your sense of purpose if you're younger, or your legacy if you're further in your career, kind of how would you describe what you want that to be for your personal brand and your personal leadership? So Barrie, I'd like to start with you. Good question.
I think something that I'm still figuring out and don't know the answer to is whether I care about my sense of purpose or whether I care about doing something that gives me the lifestyle I want to have. And I'm serious about that. That's something I struggle with every day. I think most of you probably work 50, 60, 70 hours, and I think that's really admirable. And I think maybe that is something I want, but I'm not sure, and I'm trying to figure that out. And I think in general, for my sense of purpose, I just want to feel valued and feel like I'm always learning, and I definitely want to be happy.
I think we've assembled a fabulous panel this morning that have inspired all of us, given us things to think about, really helped us think about that leading edge and what it means to be successful. I really want to ask you to join me in thanking all three of them, Barrie Schwartz, Steve Carley, and Michelle Mason.